I'm pretty sure every rancher has imagined waking up to find a busted fence, a sick calf, maybe even a stranger's cattle wandering across the pasture. But I can promise you this. Nobody expects to wake up and discover that an HOA somehow claims they own part of your ranch overnight. That's exactly what happened to me. And by the time it was over, I wasn't just fighting over a property line anymore. I was fighting people who believed a few forged documents could erase 3 generations of my family's life. If you've ever wondered how far power can go when nobody pushes back, stick around, because this story still divides people in my county to this day. My name is Garrett Lawson, and until last spring, I figured I understood every inch of my ranch better than I understood most people. 200 acres of rolling pasture, a creek that never seemed to run dry, old cottonwoods planted by my grandfather, and enough fencing repairs over the years to convince me that barbed wire has a personal grudge against ranchers. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Most mornings started before sunrise with a cup of burnt coffee that somehow tasted better outside than it ever did inside the house. I'd check the cattle, ride the fence line, wave at my neighbor across the hill if he happened to be out, then spend the rest of the day fixing whatever decided to break. That's ranch life. It doesn't care about your plans. It hands you new ones every morning. The funny thing is, I almost missed the piece of paper that started all of it. It was still dark enough that the porch light hadn't shut off automatically when I walked toward the front gate. Something bright caught my eye. At first I thought some teenager had stapled a hunting flyer to my fence. Then I got closer. Bright orange paper, official looking, heavy stock, fancy seal printed across the top. I tore it down before I even read it because nobody has any business stapling anything to my gate without asking first. Then I unfolded it, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes your brain laughs before it understands something impossible. According to the notice, my ranch had officially been incorporated into Cedar Bluff Residential Association, effective immediately. I read that sentence 3 times, then 4. Then I flipped the paper over thinking maybe there had to be another page explaining the joke. There wasn't. Instead, there were rules. Livestock visibility standards, fence appearance requirements, water management inspections, mandatory compliance meetings. Failure to comply could result in legal action, financial penalties, and possible reassignment of disputed property. I remember actually saying out loud, "Well, somebody's lost their damn mind." My ranch sat almost half a mile outside their subdivision. Those houses hadn't even existed when my dad was teaching me how to throw hay bales. Their neighborhood had sidewalks, matching mailboxes, and little decorative trees every 20 feet. We had coyotes, mesquite, and fences older than some marriages. There wasn't a world where an HOA suddenly owned my land. At least that's what I believed 5 minutes earlier. Gravel crunched behind me before I had time to walk back toward the house. I turned around expecting a delivery truck. Instead, I saw a spotless black SUV easing through my open gate like it belonged there. Out stepped a woman wearing pressed khakis, polished boots that had clearly never touched mud, sunglasses bigger than necessary, and the kind of confident smile that usually means somebody's about to ask you for money. "Mr. Lawson," she called. "Good morning. Depends who's asking." She smiled a little wider. "I'm Evelyn Cross, president of Cedar Bluff Residential Association. I assume you've received our notice." I held up the orange paper. "You mean this?" "Yes. You folks drop trash on everybody's property this early, or am I getting special treatment?" She didn't even blink. "Your property now falls within our updated jurisdiction following the approval of the new community expansion plan." I stared at her long enough that even the birds seemed to stop making noise. "Ma'am, My grandfather bought this ranch in 1958. Our records indicate otherwise. That sentence, simple as it sounded, hit me harder than I expected. Our records indicate otherwise. Like 70 years of deeds, surveys, tax payments, droughts, floods, branding seasons, and family funerals could all disappear because someone updated a spreadsheet. I folded the notice and tucked it into my shirt pocket. "I think you've got the wrong address." "No, Mr. Lawson." She pulled out a tablet and turned the screen toward me. "According to our revised county boundary submission, approximately 60 acres of your eastern pasture are now subject to Cedar Bluff community regulations." There it was, a map. Bright blue boundary lines wrapped around part of my ranch like somebody had colored over it with a marker. I'd looked at my property survey dozens of times over the years. This wasn't it, not even close. The creek curved differently. The tree line had shifted. Even my north fence somehow moved almost 200 feet on their version. "That's fake," I said. "It's filed. It's fake. It's pending county review. Still fake." Her smile faded just enough for me to realize she wasn't used to hearing the word no. "Mr. Lawson," she said calmly, "whether you agree or not, compliance begins today. We'll need access to inspect your livestock and document existing structures." I laughed again, this time because it was either laugh or lose my temper. "Lady, you aren't stepping another foot on my property." Before either of us could say another word, another vehicle rolled onto the driveway. This one I recognized immediately. Sheriff Daniel Brooks climbed out, adjusting his hat with the tired expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Morning, Garrett." "Sheriff." He glanced between me and Evelyn. "Got a call about threats being made against HOA representatives." I looked straight at Evelyn. "You called the sheriff because I told you to get off my land. Your behavior was aggressive," she answered smoothly. "My volunteers felt unsafe." "Volunteers," I said. "You walked onto private property without permission." Brooks let out the kind of sigh only law enforcement can perfect after 20 years on the job. "Let's all slow down." Evelyn handed him the tablet. "Sheriff, as you can see, the county has already received the updated boundary filing." Brooks studied the map for several long seconds. His eyebrows slowly pulled together. "This doesn't match the parcel records I've seen before." "Those records are being updated." "By who?" She hesitated, just enough for me to notice. "The proper authorities." Brooks handed the tablet back but didn't look convinced. He turned toward me. "Garrett, don't do anything that'll make this worse." "I'll check with the county office myself." "You do that," I said quietly, "because somebody's lying." Evelyn adjusted her sunglasses, completely unfazed. "We'll be back tomorrow for the inspection." I took one slow step toward her. "No, you won't." For the first time, her smile disappeared completely. We stood there in silence, the morning wind pushing dust across the driveway, while somewhere out in the pasture my cattle kept grazing like nothing unusual was happening. Funny how animals never panic until there's an actual reason to. People, though, people can create disasters with nothing more than paperwork. I watched the SUV disappear down the road, then looked back at the orange notice still sticking out of my pocket. Something about the whole thing felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Not ridiculous, deliberate. Like this wasn't the beginning of an argument. It was the final move in a game someone else had been playing for a long time. And somehow, I hadn't even realized I'd been sitting at the table. The rest of that morning, I couldn't get any real work done. I'd start fixing a section of fence, then catch myself staring toward the road instead. I'd fill a water trough, then pull that orange notice back out of my pocket like maybe the words would change if I looked long enough. They never did. Around noon, I climbed into my old pickup and headed into town. because there was only one person I trusted to tell me whether I'd somehow lost my mind or somebody else had. Her name was Clea Bennett. We'd gone to high school together, though back then she was the girl who always sat in the front row taking notes, while I was usually wondering how much daylight I'd have left to finish chores after football practice. Years later, she'd become the best property attorney in 3 counties, and I'd learned the hard way that when Clea stopped talking and started reading, somebody was usually about to have a bad day. She laid the notice flat across her desk, adjusted her glasses, and didn't say a word for almost 2 minutes. I finally broke the silence. Well, she didn't answer. Instead, she picked up a ruler, measured the margins, then scanned the QR code with her phone. Her expression changed just enough to make my stomach tighten. "Garrett, where exactly did you get this?" "Stapled to my front gate before sunrise." "Anybody else touch it?" "Just me." She leaned back in her chair. "Good, don't throw it away." "Why?" "Because this isn't just wrong, it's professionally wrong." I frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She turned her monitor toward me. "See this parcel identification number?" I nodded. "It doesn't exist." Meaning whoever created this invented a county parcel that has never been assigned to anyone. I felt a chill crawl up the back of my neck. "So Evelyn forged it." Clea folded her hands. "Maybe. Or somebody forged it for her. Either way, this document would never survive a legitimate court challenge, unless they plan to support it with additional fraudulent filings." Those last 4 words landed harder than anything I'd heard all morning. Additional fraudulent filings. That meant the notice wasn't the scam, it was step 1. Before I could ask another question, Clea opened the County Geese database and typed in the coordinates printed on the notice. The system searched for several seconds before flashing a red message across the screen. "Parcel not found." She looked at me quietly. "There it is." I rubbed both hands across my face. "How does somebody even try something like this?" "Confidence," she answered. "Most people panic when they receive official paperwork. They don't verify it. They comply first and ask questions later." I was still trying to process everything when her assistant hurried into the office carrying a stack of mail. "Clea, sorry to interrupt, but the clerk's office just emailed revised subdivision maps." Clea's head snapped up. "Already?" She opened the attachment, and for a second I thought the room had gotten colder. There it was again. My ranch. Only this time it wasn't 60 acres, it was nearly 80. The new blue boundary pushed even deeper into my eastern pasture, swallowing the creek access I'd used my entire life. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. Clea slowly shook her head. "No, they're escalating. Overnight." "No, Garrett," she looked me dead in the eye. "This took planning." Before either of us could speak again, someone knocked on her office door. Deputy Ethan Miles stood outside holding 3 wooden survey stakes under one arm. Fresh mud still clung to the bottoms. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. Clea immediately noticed the paint. "Where'd those come from?" Ethan laid them across her conference table. "Found these about 10 feet inside Garrett's north fence line this morning." I stared at them. "Those weren't there yesterday." "I know." Ethan lowered his voice. "Sheriff Brooks asked me to keep my eyes open after yesterday's call. Officially, I can't accuse anybody of anything, but somebody's placing markers before the paperwork's even approved." Clea picked one up and turned it over. A strip of blue paint circled the top. She didn't even hesitate. "These came from Cedar Bluff's landscaping contractor." Ethan looked surprised. "You recognize the color?" "I represented them in a dispute 3 years ago. They use blue for internal expansion surveys." I felt something shift inside me. Yesterday I'd been irritated. Now I was angry, not loud angry, the dangerous kind, the quiet kind that settles into your chest and stays there. "Why me?" I asked. "Why this ranch?" Clea walked over to the county map hanging on her wall. She pointed first at my property, then at the subdivision, then traced a line toward the creek. "Because you own this." "Water," Not just water, access, utility easements, future development possibilities. Ethan nodded slowly. If somebody controlled this stretch, he pointed toward the creek crossing, they'd control every new road heading east. Suddenly it all made sense. This had never been about cows or fences or neighborhood rules. The HOA wasn't trying to make my pasture prettier. Somebody wanted leverage, and my ranch happened to be sitting on top of it. Clea turned back toward her computer. Garrett, I need certified copies of every deed your family has ever recorded. I've got them at home. Good, make duplicates. Keep one set somewhere nobody knows about. I stared at her. You think it'll get that bad? She didn't answer right away. That silence told me everything. As Ethan gathered the survey stakes, his phone buzzed. He looked down, frowned, then slipped it back into his pocket. What? I asked. Dispatch just reported construction activity near your creek. My head came up so fast my chair nearly tipped backward. Construction. No permit listed. I didn't even wait for another word. 20 minutes later, I was bouncing down the ranch road toward the creek, dust boiling behind my truck. Before I even reached the hill overlooking the water, I knew something was wrong. My cattle weren't grazing. They were standing together in one nervous cluster, staring toward the creek bed. Ranchers notice things like that. Healthy cattle spread out, nervous cattle gather. I climbed the hill, and my heart nearly stopped. Bright orange construction fencing stretched across the entire creek bank. Metal posts had been driven into the ground. 3 men wearing matching polo shirts were unloading more fencing from the back of a trailer. I slammed the truck into park and climbed out. Hey, my voice echoed across the pasture. Every one of them looked up. What exactly do you think you're doing? The tallest one barely glanced at me before returning to his work. Environmental preservation project. On whose property? Protected community zone. I walked closer until I stood only a few feet away. You're standing on Lawson Ranch. He held out a laminated sheet without the slightest hint of concern. Updated jurisdiction. I didn't even bother reading it. Take every inch of this fence down. That's when I heard a familiar voice drifting across the breeze, calm, polite, smug enough to make your teeth hurt. Mr. Lawson, always in such a hurry. I turned around. Evelyn Cross was walking toward us with that same tablet tucked under one arm, smiling like she'd rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. She stopped just outside arm's reach. We're simply protecting an environmentally sensitive water source. I pointed toward the creek. My grandfather watered cattle here before your subdivision was a sketch on somebody's napkin. She smiled again. History doesn't override updated jurisdiction. I laughed once, softly this time. You really believe that, don't you? She tilted her head. No, Garrett, I believe paperwork wins. I looked from her to the fence, then back toward my thirsty cattle waiting behind me. Right then, I realized this wasn't about moving a property line anymore. She wasn't trying to claim my land first. She was trying to make the ranch impossible to operate, because desperate people make desperate decisions. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I had the uncomfortable feeling that Evelyn Cross wasn't the one actually calling the shots. Somewhere behind her, somebody with a much bigger plan was quietly pulling the strings. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those orange fences cutting across my creek like somebody had drawn a line through my family's history with a cheap marker. Around 3 in the morning, I finally gave up, poured another cup of coffee that tasted more like burnt dirt than coffee, and sat on the porch listening to the cattle. Ranchers get to know the sounds of their animals. You know when they're calm, when they're hungry, when something has them uneasy. That night they sounded confused. And somehow that bothered me more than anything Evelyn had said. Before sunrise, I walked into the old storage room behind the kitchen, where my late wife's filing cabinets still sat exactly the way she'd left them. Emma believed every receipt, every survey, every handwritten note deserved its own folder. I used to tease her that if civilization ever collapsed, she'd still be able to organize the apocalypse alphabetically. Standing there, I realized she might have saved the ranch without ever knowing it. I found the original survey binder she'd kept for nearly 20 years. Inside were photographs of every fence repair, every creek measurement after heavy rain, every boundary marker we'd ever replaced. Tucked between 2 pages was a handwritten note in her neat cursive. "Never trust memory when paper can tell the truth." I smiled without meaning to. "You'd be enjoying this fight," I whispered. An hour later, Clea arrived carrying 2 banker's boxes and enough determination to make a judge nervous. Ethan pulled in right behind her. Neither of them wasted time with small talk. We spread maps, deeds, photographs, tax records, and Emma's survey notes across my dining room table until there wasn't an inch of wood left showing. Clea compared every page against the digital records she downloaded the night before. Then she froze. "Garrett." She pointed at her laptop screen. "Look at this timestamp." The county record showed my grandfather's original deed reference had been deleted less than 3 weeks earlier. Not misplaced, not archived, deleted. Ethan leaned over her shoulder, his face tightening. "That requires administrator access," Clea nodded. "And somebody used it." The room went completely quiet. I'd spent 2 days believing I was fighting an overconfident HOA president. Now I understood I was staring at something much uglier. Somebody inside the county offices had helped rewrite history. "So what now?" I asked. Clea closed the laptop. "Now we stop reacting and start setting the trap." She explained the plan in 1 sentence. "Let them think they're winning." It sounded backwards, but the more she talked, the more sense it made. If we rushed into court with only suspicions, the county could freeze everything while they investigated. The creek would stay blocked. The paperwork would keep moving. Evelyn would hide behind procedure, but if we caught them expanding the fraud, if we documented every false filing, every trespass, every fake inspection, they'd bury themselves. For the next several days, that's exactly what happened. Cameras went up along my fence lines. Ethan quietly photographed every new survey stake that appeared. Clea filed public records requests almost faster than the clerk's office could answer them. Meanwhile, Cedar Bluff kept getting bolder. They mailed violation notices to my neighbor Hank Wheeler, claiming his barn was too visible from the subdivision entrance. Hank laughed so hard he nearly dropped the letter. His barn had been standing there since Richard Nixon was president. Another ranch family received a notice claiming their cattle created excessive dust, affecting neighborhood property values. Folks who had never questioned the HOA before suddenly started calling one another. The pattern became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just my ranch anymore. It was every piece of land surrounding Cedar Bluff that had water access, road frontage, or development value. Then Ethan called late one evening. "I found it," he said quietly. "The original subdivision plat." We met after dark at the old county archive building. Hidden in a basement storage room sat a stack of oversized record books that hadn't been digitized. The original plat was exactly what we'd expected. Cedar Bluff ended nearly half a mile short of my ranch. There wasn't even a hint of overlap. Then Ethan showed us another volume. Same year, same survey, different pages. Somebody had physically replaced sections of the official record. Clea slowly exhaled. "This isn't fraud anymore, this is organized." Before we could photograph everything, footsteps echoed down the basement hallway. Ethan whispered one word. "Hide." We slipped behind steel shelving just as the deputy county clerk entered carrying a flashlight. He looked directly at the open record books and immediately pulled out his phone. "She's right," he muttered. "Somebody found the originals." My pulse hammered so hard I thought he'd hear it. A woman's voice crackled through the speaker. I recognized it instantly. "Evelyn, seal the archive," she said. "I'll handle the rest." Ethan knocked over a stack of empty archive boxes at the opposite end of the room. The crash echoed through the basement. While the clerk hurried toward the noise, the three of us slipped through a side exit into the alley. We didn't stop running until we reached Clea's car. Nobody spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, she looked at me and smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. "We got them." 3 nights later, Cedar Bluff held its annual homeowners meeting. Evelyn expected another routine evening approving budgets and landscaping projects. She had no idea nearly half the county planned to attend. The community hall was packed long before the meeting started. Homeowners filled every chair. Ranchers lined the back wall. Sheriff Brooks stood quietly near the entrance with Ethan beside him. Clea carried one small flash drive in her hand. That little piece of plastic held enough evidence to destroy an empire built on lies. Evelyn stepped to the podium wearing the same polished smile I'd seen at my front gate. "Our first order of business," she began, "is approving funding for expanded community management." Clea looked at me and nodded. It was time. We walked to the front together. Murmurs spread through the room. Evelyn's smile disappeared. "Mr. Lawson," she said tightly, "this meeting is for members only." I set the original plat book on the table with a heavy thud that echoed across the hall. "Funny thing about that," I replied. "Your neighborhood keeps trying to become part of my ranch, so I figured I'd return the favor." A few people laughed, most just stared. Clea plugged the flash drive into the projector. The first image filled the screen. Original county map. Then the altered version appeared beside it. Audible gasps rolled across the room. Next came the deletion logs, the fake parcel numbers, the nighttime trail camera photos showing contractors planting survey stakes on my property. Finally came the recording from the archive basement. Evelyn's own voice ordering someone to seal the records before the originals could leave the building. Silence settled over the room like heavy rain. Nobody moved. Nobody even coughed. Sheriff Brooks stepped forward. "Ms. Cross," he said evenly, "I'd like you to remain here while we discuss several criminal matters." She looked around the room searching for support. There wasn't any. Homeowners who had defended her for years slowly lowered their eyes. One elderly man stood and pointed toward the screen. "You told us the expansion was legal." A young mother spoke next. "You raised our dues to pay for this." Then another voice. And another. Questions became accusations. Accusations became outrage. Evelyn finally looked at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. "Fear. You think you've won," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, I think the truth finally caught up." Sheriff Brooks placed a hand on her arm and escorted her toward the exit while investigators collected the evidence Clea had prepared. Nobody applauded. Somehow that would have cheapened the moment. People simply watched as the woman who'd spent months convincing everyone she controlled the future of the county walked out without a single ally beside her. A month later, every fraudulent filing was thrown out. The county restored my family's deed. The creek fence came down. Cedar Bluff voted to dissolve the HOA entirely and replace it with a voluntary neighborhood council that couldn't seize so much as a mailbox without homeowner approval. Life eventually settled back into something that looked familiar. These days, when I ride along the creek at sunrise, the cattle drink where they've always drank, the cottonwoods still sway over the water, and the fences only need fixing because of weather instead of politics. But every now and then I still think about that orange notice, not because it almost cost me my ranch, but because it reminded me how easily ordinary people can surrender their rights when nobody bothers to question official-looking paper. So here's what I'd like to ask you. If someone showed up tomorrow with documents claiming they own part of your home, would you fight? Or would you assume the paperwork had to be right? Let me know down in the comments, because I honestly believe that's the question this whole story was really about. And if you enjoyed this story about standing your ground, justice, and refusing to let powerful people rewrite the truth, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experience. I'd love to read it.